A very good morning to everyone that has joined. My name is Shubhang Bhattacharya, and I'm the marketing and brand manager at Scylla. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you for the exciting webinar on the application of AI in market research. In today's digital landscape, understanding consumer behavior and market trends has never been more critical. AI has emerged as a powerful ally in understanding the intricacies of consumer behavior and transforming data into actionable strategies. The significance of this subject cannot be overstated, as it has the potential to revolutionize how we approach market research, making it more accurate, efficient, and insightful. To guide us through today's enlightening journey, it is my pleasure to introduce our host, Faisal Khan, who brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in the field of AI and market research, and has been a strategic research partner to a number of leading brands in the Middle East region. Without further ado, I invite Faisal Khan to take the reins and lead us into the world of AI powered market research. Throughout the session, if you have any questions or queries, kindly use the chat option to put those questions and comments forward, and I will bring them up with Faisal at the end of the presentation. Faisal, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shubhang. Good morning, everybody. I'm looking forward to the next 60 minutes where I'm going to be taking you through application of AI in market research. The next 55 minutes, we've kind of split it out across different sections. I'm trying to do justice. It's difficult to do it in the time given, but it gives a good overview and a good perspective on how AI is being implemented currently in market research. What are the ways you can use it, and how it kind of helps in the entire journey of any kind of project you're doing to capture consumer intelligence. So we've got it divided into 5 broad sections where I'll introduce and give a context of why it's extremely important to use AI in market research and how that's making things and changing things in the industry. We cannot not talk about data democratization because that's one of the achievements that AI has been able to do. Generative AI, chat GPT, these are buzzwords. So wanted to touch upon how that is currently being used in the industry and how we can kind of touch upon it. I've got some use cases, and we'll end the session with some question and answers and some closing thoughts from our end. I'll get started with market research, and slightly, I won't say a controversial slide, but debatable. There've been discussions around, sorry, there've been discussions around the MR industry and how it's not been really proactive when it comes to adopting digital means of doing research. So if you look at the ecosystem of marketing, so there's marketing, advertising, PR, communication, and if you look at these industries, they've been very evolved. They've been very quick to adopt technology. Even today, if you see, they were early adopters, and they're quite actively kind of moving ahead. But when it comes to MR, which is a part of the same ecosystem, which is a core, which works hand in hand with any marketing initiative that you're doing, it's slightly lagged behind versus its other industries within the same ecosystem. But having said that, things are changing with AI. AI is making things in the market research industry now very different in the way it's done and how quickly, how cost efficiently you can do market research. One of the things which I often have discussions with my clients and during meetings about market research and AI in market research is, what is the real advantage of AI? Why is there such a need of adopting AI or using AI in market research? While there are many reasons, I often hear of discussions around, let's say, cost effectiveness, around time, how you can kind of make things quicker, and all that is true. So there are a lot of operational elements around market research that AI is able to ease off. But to me, there is a fundamental need of that AI is what makes AI important in market research. And that is bridging the say-do gap. So currently, if you look at any traditional means of research, which is a question and answer approach that is taken, whether it's through an in-depth interview, a focus group discussion, a quantitative interview, or whatsoever means of capturing information. But it's always a response to a question from a consumer. And that's where the issue is, because a lot of this, you see a lot of Sado gap in how we are as people. We think we're very rational, but that's not true. As beings, as human beings, we are very irrational. Biases are very, very natural to us. And I'll give you some examples of where we actually piloted and saw the differences in this Sado gap that I'm talking about. So I'm going to talk about three biases. There are multiple biases that we live with, and I can suggest some books around cognitive biases. There are hundreds of biases that impact our behaviors. And the reality is that we operate and take decisions based on these biases, because 95% of the decisions we take come from the subconscious level and not from the conscious level. We might post-rationalize, but that's honestly not the real reason of why we behave the way we behave. I'll give you three examples here. If you're doing an interview or you talk to someone and you ask a consumer that how do you typically go about, let's say, evaluating different choices of taking a decision, your claim response, and these are actual examples that we've kind of tested out, where you say that I take time to think through all my options, evaluate the pros and cons, and then decide. So it's a very intelligent answer to give. But when you look at the actual behavior, you notice that this person goes on Amazon, he likes something, is contemplating it, but then you also see that there's only one left in stock, which is what we call a scarcity bias. And you are very, very quick to purchase that because you're scared that, okay, this looks good. I might, if I kind of go and search for other options, I might miss out on this option. And hence you're very quick to respond. So you can see the difference in the claim response of what a person claims and is likely to do, or claims his behavior versus what he actually behaves. The second one is a similar example in a different context, which we call a social proof bias. We might talk about how our own preferences of style, colors, or basic, whatever those preferences might be at an individual level are important. But again, as people, we are always looking at some kind of social proofing. I mean, I can give an example. If you walk into a place where there are two restaurants, the chances of you walking into a busier restaurant are higher because there are more people there. And you're wired to believe that that's a better place perhaps, and you would walk in there versus an empty restaurant. And that's where social proof bias comes at play. Or similarly, in this example, if you go to e-commerce platforms, you often see that 100 more people are bought that shoe that day. Or if you're often exploring, let's say, hotel options, you often see that how many more people are exploring the same hotel. And that kind of leads you into taking the decision. So while you might think that you're really rooting your decisions on your individual choices and preferences, but subconsciously you're actually looking for social proof. This is one of my favorite examples here, which is very common to all of us, where we all claim to be health conscious, but in most cases we are not health conscious. And there's one of the biggest areas where we see Sado gap. So you might see here that I might come back and say that I'm very health conscious and I do not buy products with fat. And if you look at these two options of frozen yogurt that are there on the screen right now, one has a claim saying it contains 20% fat. There's the same frozen yogurt. There's another way of saying the claim, which is 80% fat free. They're essentially the same thing. When one is talking about 20% fat being there, the other being talking about 80% fat free there. Then this is called framing bias in terms of how you are framing the question or how you're positioning it to the consumer. And in this case, what happens? A consumer claims to be extremely health conscious, but ends up buying something that claims to be 80% fat free because, the way it's framed, you feel that you're buying something that's fat free, whereas the reality is that you're still buying something that has 20% fat content. And why this becomes important to us, because if we are premising all our decisions on claimed responses, you are not getting the real picture. You're getting a picture of what consumers believe they are doing or what they think it is right. And it's a very intelligently, rationally placed responses you get, but that may not be the actual behaviors. And that's where what we believe as an industry is that you need to be less dependent on what customers claim to do And the focus should rather be on what they actually did and can potentially do. So it's what we're saying, that it needs to be more behavioral data that you need to premise your decisions on. So when you're talking about consumer insights, consumer intelligence, or knowing your consumer, it should ideally be based on what they actually did, behavioral data, versus what they claim to do. And we've seen examples of that in right at the previous slide. So where do you get behavioral data sources, or where does AI help you tap into behavioral data sources? There are multiple sources. There are 4 key pillars how we see it being as the key data sources for understanding consumers better. Your first one is socials. And socials is your platforms across, right, from X, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. There's a lot of data there, and a data in various ways in which you can capture the data and you can look and understand consumers. So one way, of course, the easier way to do it is what is the content being posted, what are people commenting, but it's also about, let's say, the engagement. So what I'm engaging as a consumer, what I am posting as a consumer. Even my follower base will say, tell you so much about myself. So if you're able to tap into all the kind of people, influencers, brands, topics I'm following, that tells me what my characteristics are, what my preferences are, what my affinities are, and that kind of throws in a lot of light, and all that is data. I might go back and post online saying that, hey, I attended a Trevor Noah show the other day and it was amazing. Again, says something about me, that becomes a data point. So there's a lot of data across social platforms in the form of content, likes, engagement, views, etc., across different platforms that you can use to understand consumers better. The second one, which is a very, very important pillar and has been growing over the last few years, is reviews and ratings. So you would have, as consumers, you would see. So earlier when I used to travel, I used to ask my friends, hey, you've traveled to, let's say, Zurich, and can you recommend some hotels to me, places to visit? Now I don't do that. Now I go on a TripAdvisor, I go on a booking.com, I go on Google reviews, I'll check ratings of hotels, I'll check reviews of hotels, make a comparison between them, take a decision based on that. And that's become my source of data. When you can tap into that information of reviews, ratings, of places, of things, that again becomes data. And similarly for e-commerce platforms, for example, Amazon becomes a great source of information for any kind of experiential information there. I remember doing a study a year back where we were looking at a brand was looking at entering the market, and it was with a plant-based milk. And surprisingly, one of our best sources of data turned out to be the e-commerce platforms, because people were actively sharing their perspectives, their experiences on on these e-commerce platforms on the different plant-based milks that were available in the market. And again, if you're able to see that firsthand and analyze that data, that's extremely rich. The third pillar is web and search, where you can tap into all the search results of the news and PR. So whatever results are there for a certain topic, you're able to tap into that. Google share of search is something which I'm extremely fond of myself. And the reason is it's a lead indicator of market share. So there are brands who are moving from tapping into doing very expensive market share studies that are extensive from a time perspective, from a cost perspective, from a effort perspective, and are transitioning to what we call as Google share of search, which is a very easy to access technology, which essentially tells me, for example, if I'm doing a study on electric vehicles and I identify 10 car brands, I should be able to come back and tell you what is the share of search of, let's say, Tesla versus a Volkswagen versus a Sear or whichever other brand. And that becomes, because today as consumers, Google's often our starting point. We go on Google search for anything of interest, and that becomes our starting point. That is actually a lead indicator of saying that, hey, this is the proportion of interest that people are having in a certain brand or even a certain topic. You might have 10 kinds of diets that you want to understand, and or health topics, and you can see what are the share of search for each of these topics. And again, that becomes a lead indicator, and you can historically map that from 2019 onwards to see how is that changing. So is the interest growing or degrowing? The last one is first and second party data, which is basically essentially data that is sitting with customers and clients themselves. CRM data, chatbots, emails, call center transcripts, sales, media spends, advertising inputs. There's a lot of primary traditional research that's done in the form of qualitative research, quantitative research, which is sitting with them, with customers. And that's all data that is owned by organizations, by brands. And there is so much potential to kind of, again, tap into that data and run models to understand a lot of behaviors around how their customers are behaving. Now, these, I mean, I can have a independent webinar on each of this, but I'm kind of just touching upon these four primary sources of data, which technology today allows you to access, analyze, and understand in terms of run models on it to be able to do a lot of in-depth understanding of your consumer and consumer behaviors. And these are things where you are not dependent on anyone responding to you. You're not asking a question, and hence it is absolutely authentic, accurate information because it's all organic. If I am able to understand you better by understanding who you're following, I don't need to understand and ask you, can you tell me what your areas of interest are, when I can passively find that out. The other advantages of AI and what makes it really interesting and powerful is the power of history. You're able to go into historic information. So all the data I was showing you in the previous slide, whether that's social data, whether that's data from Google, whether that's data from, or even for that matter, first party data, if the organization's capturing that from a historic perspective, or if it's reviews and ratings again. So you might go back and start from 2018, 2019 till date in a year span of, let's say, 3 years, 5 years, look at how things are changing. And it's extremely important because it might, from a strategic perspective, it might really change the way you look at things. And one example I often give, because this is a case we had done a couple of years back, where we were doing a segmentation study, which is basically sizing of different types of consumers in a certain country. There was a big segment that emerged, and it was decently sized. But when we looked at the history, the biggest segment size was also the fastest declining segment. And from a strategic perspective, that became extremely important, because if I did not have that data, if I'm only looking at today, I realized that, hey, this is my most important segment. I'm going to spend X amount, X dollars behind this segment, without realizing that this is also the fastest declining segment. And there is another segment that's very quickly growing, and the speed in it, which is growing by next year, is expected to even kind of cross and become the first biggest segment. And that's where history becomes so important. And this is true for various aspects, especially from a COVID perspective. We've done a lot of studies where we realized and able to kind of track pre-COVID behavior and post-COVID behavior. And again, not claimed responses, because you would still have a lot of claimed responses of how COVID changed their behaviors, but these are behavioral data where you can actually tap into and see what is the actual change pre-COVID and post-COVID. The other is the power of norms, which is, we call it normative data, you call it norms, some people call it benchmarks. But essentially what you're able to do, make comparisons. Again, I give this example often, that is a brand health score of 70% good or bad. Now your perspective might change. I might come back and say 70% is your brand health score. But for a certain category, that might be your category average might be 90%. And in that context, 70% is a bad score. Or in another scenario, the category average could be 40%. In that case, 70% becomes an excellent score. So again, with AI, what happens, you're able to really go big, and you're not dependent on the studies you've done in the past, but you're able to go at a geographic level. If we're doing a study, let's say just for, I don't know, hypothetically speaking, in Saudi for an e-commerce brand, you can benchmark the data of every other brand, let's say 3,000, because we are tracking 3,000 other brands in Saudi. So versus how is it performing at a Saudi level? How is it performing versus all other e-commerce brands, or even cross categories and everything else? Because it is easy to get into all those data sources to be able to understand what are the norms you want to be compared with. And it's not limited. It runs into thousands of brands where you can compare that. What you do with all this data, of course, there's a lot of analysis that you're able to do, and you're able to kind of understand a lot of things. But what AI has really achieved in the last few years is models, where you're able to run models that are not humanly possible to run in that size of data. Maybe I should have mentioned it a while back, but when I was talking about the different data sources, the data that you get runs into millions of data points, because we're talking about the data like socials, Google searches, etc. These data runs into hundreds and thousands of people across millions of data points that you're analyzing, and on those data sets, it's impossible to analyze humanly. So that's where AI models come into place, whether that's demographic models, dialect models, predictive analytics, segmentation, brand health. I might not, again, this could be a topic in itself, each one of them. I won't get into the details of each one of them, but I'll talk about a couple of them just to give you a sense. Demographic, for example, might sound a very simplistic model to say that, what's the gender, what's the age bands. But I'll tell you why demographic is so exciting. When you're doing a traditional research, let's say you're doing a quantitative research with 1,000 people, what you have to do, again, going back to, I don't know, let's say uh, 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 plant-based milks, which we were talking about a while back. But let's say if you're doing a study on plant-based milk and you want to meet consumers, a target audience, and run a questionnaire with, let's say, 1,000 people. Now, what you do in that case, you have to predefine an audience. And that will be based on hypothesis, based on discussions, not on behavioral data, but just based on hypothesis that, hey, we assume the data, the chances of someone being a plant-based consumer will be in this age bracket, for this gender, in this country, whatsoever. What happens in AI? You collect all the data around plant-based. On that data, you run a demographic model, and that model helps you identify the audience. So that becomes actually an output versus giving an input based on hypothesis. Again, I'll probably give you a couple of more examples. Dialect is another interesting one, and especially in the region we live in. We often talk about Arabic consumers, Arabic data, Arabs. That's what our consumer base is. But when it comes to Arabic per se, anyone in the region understands it has multiple dialects. So when an Egyptian person says something in a certain way versus the same thing is said by a Saudi person, in his dialect, the interpretation of data changes, whether that is being said or whether the system picks it up or the machine picks it up as an Egyptian dialect. If it picks it up in an Egyptian dialect, it interprets it in that certain way, versus if it picks up it's in Saudi dialect, it interprets in that certain way, because the meaning will essentially change. So hence what we do, as for example at Scylla, we're basically an Arabic native technology, an Arabic native AI, which does analysis at a dialect level, which is able to capture the different dialects, and those dialects able to then do the analysis and interpretation based on those dialects. Similarly, you've got personality insights, segmentation, brand health, understanding emotions, because sentiment is not enough, but you can run analysis on understanding emotions. And these all models as of today, and this has been tested, at least we have tested it in various ways of running these models. The accuracy is around 90%, 90+%, in some cases touches up to 94, 95%, which is a very, very, very high level of accuracy. So if you're able to get all that data, I a while back spoke about all the sources of data, depending on the objective of the research or what you're trying to, or what you're going after, run different kinds of models to be able to understand what the behavioral aspect is, and what decisions, whether that's marketing decisions, business decisions that need to be taken, can be very based on very high levels of results based on all those models that we run on that big data. One of the things I want to end this section about talking about, where AI application is in market research, we're going to talk about more interesting things as we progress, but is image recognition. So we are very familiar with text analytics. We're very familiar with NLP. It's a word that's been used and floating around for many years. LLM, ChatGPT has made LLM popular with, basically large language models, where you're able to kind of capture into much more advanced levels of text analysis, which is great. Accuracies are improving. All those models are based on NLP and LLMs. But what's also now becoming important are images. And that is also a source of data. So we are able to capture, with the rise of mediums like Instagram, with the rise of mediums like TikTok, which are very visual heavy, it becomes important to not miss that information and capture that information. So we are, for example, in our case, we're able to identify objects, we're able to identify logos, brands. So if I, for instance, am posting a picture on Instagram that I had an amazing breakfast, and here's a picture of my breakfast spread, and had some amazing custard, without mentioning a brand, what the technology does is it picks up the logo, it identifies the category, it picks up the logo, and can attribute the good breakfast, the good custards to, let's say in this case, an almarai. So this is another way of, this becomes an important aspect of AI and how it's able to capture data, along with, of course, all the textual data that we're able to analyze and run those models on. So that basically, that what we are trying to drive through that section is saying that why is AI important, which it is extremely important. And we talked about how it bridges the gap between the say and the do, and hence why claimed responses may not always be the best, but it's important to kind of give capture behavioral data, and how you actually can go about capturing all that behavioral data, from where you can capture it, and why it kind of is very accurate in what you can do with it. One of the achievements, I'm moving on to the next section, which is on data democratization. One of the biggest impact of AI on research is data democratization. It's basically essentially means where you were very dependent on agencies, on people, on internal stakeholders for data. So you had to ask people for data, you had to think through it, what data you need, and then there would be a data collection process, etc. Now, in today's environment with AI, what is happening is that there are no gatekeepers. Every stakeholder, it's basically data is now sitting on every single table, and you can give that access to everyone. So what happens is you are able to automate a process where you are able to automate a process which kind of gives access to the data, where the data is refreshed on its own. It's structured in a way where you can analyze the data yourself using very easy filters, whether you want to see data by age, whether you want to see data by gender, how is it changing by timeline, etc. Right? And this data is sitting on with everyone now. With AI, you can give access to multiple stakeholders, and you don't necessarily need to be dependent on other people to be able to reach out or even do a new study or refresh the data, because it's automated. And I'll give you some examples here in terms of what I mean by data democratization. Here's an example, for example, of a dashboard. So what you get, you've developed a process where where the data is being collected in an automated way, where it's being already structured in a certain way, which is aligned with organizations, and you can then constantly track, and you're sitting on this data, and you can give this access to anyone in a system. So for example, this screenshot that I've taken here is one of my favorite restaurants, is PF Chang's. It captures the reviews and ratings from different platforms and social platforms of what people are talking about it. So it talks about the number of reviews it's analyzed, the number of users it's coming from, what is the average review score, what is the average how sorry, how does it compare to the category that we've defined. Here you can see trended analysis of the reviews from 2019. Where are the peaks, where are the dips? We've also kind of split out all the review data into topics of interest related to location, pricing, servicing, looked at, what is the quantum of conversation. Of course, this is just one screenshot, but there's an entire dashboard. If you look on the top, you'll see filters, so you can see it by brands, competition, you can see it by time range, you can deep dive into various aspects, or by even topic of within each one of them. And this is true for any study that you do, where you will be the owner of the data. We do the process, we collect the data, but we've established a process where now the data sits with you. You can take the decisions yourself, you can see the insights yourself. For that matter, now with these dashboards, what we've done is integrated. I'll talk about that in a bit, but GPT Assistance, where you can also interact within this data set. You can ask a question like a chat GPT functions, where you say that, is there any trend you notice, and it will give you a response by looking into that data set. The other thing about example of data democratization is APIs. And this we realized over time, because and this is specifically for first-party data, because what typically happens is that a lot of first-party data is confidential, especially with banks, hotel groups, but they sit on a lot of data in terms of the NPS studies they do, the feedback they get through social channels, the emails they get, the call center messages they get, the chat, the data on the chatbots they get, and that's not necessarily easy to share with third parties. So what now API does, like for example, I can give you an example of Scylla API, is where they can access our APIs. Let's say, again, hypothetically putting an example here, but let's say there's an HSBC who wants to do some kind of analysis on their data that they've captured. They can access the API model and run models on that. So what it does, it goes on to Scylla's API, in kind of puts in their data on that and uses our models, whether that's a sentiment model, an emotional model, or personality model, or even any kind of predictive model that we have available with us in terms of in our API system. You can run that, and this does not, and the data gets destroyed, but you get the output in a certain format that is available for you for decision making. In this case, there is our absence, we are not required. As an agency, we are not required. You're not even required. You can use all our strengths, all our models that we've trained, and we don't need to even come in the picture where there's no need for you to share data with us. This is an example of that. This is more from an agency perspective, but this is where there was an output from a very big quantitative research. So they were open-ended responses where they captured, this was for a hair color brand, where they kind of tested a product, left a product with consumers. The consumers put on the product, and they captured the feedback immediately on day 2 of applying that hair color and on week 3. And they kind of capture responses. Again, the agency was able to use our API to kind of put themes to the different responses and do a sentiment analysis. And there was I remember a huge jump in positive from when comparing to day 2 results versus, let's say, week 3 results. So that kind of, and it was very quick. Like they get responses in literally 5 minutes, 10 minutes, where you kind of insert the data. And again, we're not in picture here. It's they own that data, they insert it, they use our models, they literally pay online and get a result in the next few minutes. What's very exciting, and I'm going to slowly find a segue to get into what we call as GPT Assistance. It's become a household conversation. I think now there's no one who wouldn't know or hasn't heard about ChatGPT. It's become, like I said, a household conversation. Everyone's talking about it and its capabilities, and everyone's exploring in what ways we can use it. So from a market research perspective, so far there are multiple levels in a market research journey. So you've got data collection, you've got analysis, like the models, you've got the dashboarding, which is output. But what you did not necessarily have is the interpretation and the actual insights. Now, what GPT Assistants have started doing, that they've made insights and interpretation also automated. So for example, we've got our own GPT Assistant, which is basically an LLM. It's an LLM model, which I spoke about a while back. It's essentially like a GPT-4 style conversation, where I was giving this example in the PF Chang's dashboard, where you can ask any question to that to Lara, which is integrated in the system, and get responses and interpretation and even recommendations that why could this potentially be happening? What are your recommendations to address this? Did you notice any drops? Did you notice any peaks? So you might, if you noticed a drop, you might say, hey, is there a specific age band this drop is coming from, or a specific profile or specific nationality it's coming from? So it kind of interacts with you and gives you those responses. This is, for example, one example where we've used our Lara, where we had water brands. This was for a water brand client where we tracked brand equity scores of 3,000, 4,000 brands. The system is all constantly picking up the digital health equity, and we just inserted the CSV file. It's already there in the system, and said, hey, is this what are the top brand equity scores? And it kind of gives a response. How we use this is then create things like this. So this is some marketing material that we often use, and happy to do that for any other category of interest that people have. But it kind of automatically what it does is that on Lara, what we did is inserted our CSV file, talked about the top brand index and brand equity scores. It tells me the top 10. It helps me create charts also. So it can tell me what, this is based on the last 12 months. So can you tell me a trended analysis? For that matter, it might be difficult for me to do exercises like standard deviation. But what I did, I give instructions or a prompt to Lara saying that, hey, based on, let's say, these brands that you identified, if you had to track the monthly performance, month-on-month performance, and tell me how volatile are the equity scores month-on-month, it calculated what I call as the volatility score. So the lower the volatility, the better, because it means more, the consistency in performance, and I report that. And this takes literally 5 minutes to do in terms of uploading a file, identifying the top trend brands, helping me calculate the average brand index for those 12 months, telling me the volatility scores, and you can do much more, and even giving me a summary of the findings. And I use that to create in a slightly more visually appealing format, but it really gives me good output out there. So that's like I said, it's a good segue to generative AI, which is the buzzword which everyone's talking about, and it's an interesting space. It's changing the dynamics of multiple industries, including market research. I showed you an example in the previous slides about how it's being used, but just talking about GPT assistance in generally and how you can kind of fit it in your daily workflows. I'm sure a lot of you are already doing it, but that might be on building surveys and questionnaires, discussions, guides. You don't necessarily need to build in your questionnaires, discussion guides. At least the first draft, decent output you can get from GPT Assistance. You can get summary documentations, recommendations, interpretation of data, like we were seeing a while back, templatized slides, putting together research briefs, building hypotheses, and there's much more everyday tasks that are possible through using GPT Assistance. But there is a word of caution. It's not, there are a lot of things that are possible, but one of the big things that I learned is do not use GPT Assistance, the ones that are publicly available, do not take it at face value, because there could be results that may seem plausible, but are actually not true, or in a more commonly used phrase or term is misinformation. Misinformation is common on the internet. So how these GPT assistants function: when you give a prompt, it kind of tokenizes information and picks it up from a certain set of data and brings it back to you. Now, there's often no way to kind of authenticate the source it's got the information from. So there is a chance, or there is a plausibility that my information may not be correct. So it's extremely important to not take things at face value. And we did an example, and this is an actual example that you see here. This is not from GPT-4, but from Bard, where we kind of put in some information, asked about certain data points. It gave me very interesting data points, which sounds like amazing, very clear, hard numbers, talks about certain hypotheses. And interestingly, it gives me references of where it found the topic. When you actually go on those references, you will often get errors, or I got an error in this case, not often, but sometimes you get errors, or you might go to something where it may not be correct. So you just need to be extremely careful in terms of the data you're getting, how you're using it, and not taking things at face value. But the more important thing, I think, is about confidentiality, where you need to understand where these GPT assistants that you're using on your daily basis, the ones that are publicly available, your data is not secure there. It's not confidential, because all that data that you're putting in that is actually used to train the future versions of the model. And that's how modeling works, or that how machine learning functions, where every data input becomes a source of training the model. And if you're using on these public GPT assistants like GPT-4, if you're using data, you're kind of uploading data and doing its interpretation analysis, all that data is moving on to train their future versions. And hence, as simple as it is, you cannot use it for any sensitive data, any customized research work, any kind of Excel files that you're working on, because it's just not safe there. And hence comes trained GPT assistants, where where you have where you have assistants or organizations are building trained GPT assistants that are limited to your own data source, which are working within that data set, which is giving you results from that data set, and is not and that stays safe and secure in that system. For example, I was giving you an example of Lara, where we upload documents. That's all safe, that sits with us, that's not on public domain, is not used for publicly kind of training the model for further usage. Talking about GPT assistance, I did show you an example of the water brand where we kind of uploaded a CSV file and we got some results of the top brand indexes, the volatility scores, very easy to do, the recommendations around it. What I'd like to also show you is a live example of uploading a file and and that's where I'm talking about the interpretation part, that how it helps you interpret data. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second and share my the interface of Lara. Just give me a second. I'm going to stop sharing here. And here I go. Share screen. Okay. Make this full screen. Cool. I'm going to start a new chat. So this is a very simplistic, it's a prototype I'm just using for now for the purpose of this webinar. This is Lara. This is Sila's in-house GPT assistant. There's a full form to Lara. So I will confirm this, start a new chat. Okay, I'm going to browse a file here. We did a report sometime back for back to school, which was basically essentially captured all data around back to school. And it's a longish report, which gives insights around the Middle East, specifically focused on Saudi and UAE, about the back to school campaigns, what's happening, how do you kind of go about it. So I'll upload this file here, and this file gets uploaded, and it was quick. It was a large file, but it was quick. I'm just going to type, can you tell me the summary of back to school? Let me press an enter. It might take a couple of now, and I'm talking about a large file. This should be around, if I'm not wrong, around 40 slides, 40 odd slides, which it's processing. And it gives me, I didn't see the time, but it was a few seconds, I guess, where it says, it gives me a response saying that the back to school season extends over a 3-month period, split into 3 crucial phases: before the promotional peak, blah, blah, blah. It talks about other aspects of it. So this is just an example, and I could upload CSV files here. I could upload, I'm going to go back to, sorry, just give me a second, going back to my report. Yep, and here I am back to my, great. So that's that. I mean, I can upload CSV files here, reports here, get interpretation of trained. Let's say if you have reports, large reports from your history, if there are organizations who've done a large segmentation brand health study, you want to upload it, you've got it from the agency, you've integrated your systems here, you upload a report, you get a response in terms of summary. The better the prompt, the better the response, and it stays absolutely secure because it's collecting data from within that data set only, limited to that data set. So if you're integrating Lara or equivalent in your daily workflows, you have an interactive GPT assistant with you, within the data set. So report summaries, recommendations, analysis of raw data files, generating quick charts also. You can generate very quick charts and say, in the last 12 months, can you create a trend chart for me? And it does that. Or even open-ended responses. So, like I was talking about in the case of APIs, where you're able to do that. So that's that. So that was pretty much my introduction to. I try to cover a lot around the possibilities and applications of AI in market research, and like I said, a lot of these topics could be a topic in itself, whether those data sources, the models, there could be sessions in itself. We have a huge base of, we do a lot of work in this AI-based market research and consumer insights. So we have multiple case studies across different categories. Would be happy if any one of you want to connect with us and talk about specific use cases or specific kinds of studies that we've done. Because this deck had a few case studies, but I'm just keeping a note of time also. I'll just take another 5 minutes and then we move to question and answers. So in the next 5 minutes, I just want to briefly tell you some examples of outputs that we've used in cases of research. Here's one, and I think I briefly spoke about this during our session in the beginning, which is a segmentation exercise. This was for a global dairy brand, which was working on their digital strategy. And so it was a dairy brand, so cooking was an important element. And this was a large scale exercise. When I say large scale exercise, it was across 125,000 women was a sample, which was again an output. We did not create the sample and decide that I want this sample, but we chose our interest areas and it helped me capture. And what happens in those 125,000 people, I'm able to go to their each individual's historic posts, data, content, and that translates into 3.25 million data points. For each of them, I capture their bios, their follower profiles, their history, and that tells me so much about them that this becomes my data points in terms of 3.25 million data points. And now I can do any kind of analysis I wish to do on that kind of base. And if you look on the top chart, sorry, it's not very clear, but it tells me the segment sizes. So we run a segmentation model. It's a proprietary model where it clusters. It clustered in this case based on similar characteristics. What are the clusters of people? And hence, and for each one of them, then you kind of you understand which one is your target audience. How do you target them? What is the tonality of message? With what products do you target them? And like I was saying a while back, a trended analysis and on the AI can do that, because if you're doing a point in time study, you'll never know what's changing. And you can see very clearly, for example, the last segment on the top, on the bottom, which is contemporary young adults, you can see from 2019 to 2022 how much it's grown, and if the same growth rate continues, how much it'll expect it to become in 2025. So it gives you a very good picture, and you can really create long-term strategies around your marketing strategies. Here's an example of first-party data. I wanted to include it as one of the case studies is because this is media spends. This is a large organization with 13 plus categories, which wanted to understand they're spending a lot of money across Google, your programmatic advertising on different social channels. They wanted to measure for each of the categories, what is the effectiveness of this advertising. The measure of effectiveness can be anything. It could be about, let's say, sales, but in this specific case, it was conversion of the advertisement to their e-commerce platform, which eventually, of course, might lead to sales or not, but that was the key metric. And you're able to use all that first party data to be able to run your marketing mix models and arrive at the most effective. And your end output becomes a simulator where you say that this is, if I spend this much amount of money on X channel, this is the conversion rate I can get. Or you can put in a conversion rate you're expecting and see how much it's going to be investing. And how do you where are you overspending and underspending? So there's a very strong ROI measure that you can really associate itself to. I think I've got two more, and then we should be good on time. In-depth consumer understanding. When you're doing an in-depth consumer understanding, I come from one of the largest traditional research organizations. That's my background, where I've spent many, many years. A typical brief of this nature, I would have probably done maybe 6 focus group discussions, 7 focus group discussions. So I'm talking about 40, 42 people where I'm getting an in-depth understanding of consumers. Let's say if I got a brief and someone comes back to me and says, hey, I'm creating product benefits. In this case, it was credit cards that are specifically designed for Saudi. I would have probably done, like I said, 6 focus group discussions, would be approximately 36 to 40 people, and base my entire strategy around that. But now with AI, what happens? I identify through my dialect model, I'm able to identify Saudi, also my geographic model in Saudi. In this case, I was able to analyze 141,000 plus Saudi nationals, which was again going back to historic post, and this was like 34 million data points. And now from this data points, I'm able to understand them in very much detail, what their passion points are, what are their, who they like, what are the top influences they follow. One of the big insights, for example, about music events and how that is one of the biggest talk of the town in terms of and how much it's growing, and again trending that data. And in this case, it was a network provider where they were able to create or use this to create a list of credit card benefits that resonate with Saudi nationals. And like I said, this is behavioral data. You can't go wrong. It's not claimed. I know this is of areas of interest, and this is where you need to kind of be at. The last one is a customer experience study. This was done for Red Radisson, but we've done a lot of work of customer experience with hotels, which basically essentially tells us where we tap into all review platforms, social platforms, wherever they're talking about. And you can really break down into customer experience in terms of what are the experiences people are talking about. You analyze all that data to break it down into themes. In this case, for example, rooms, pools, restaurants, bed. You can go into as specific as even, for that matter, pillow quality, because when we further deep dive into bed, you can break that down into further other aspects. Or if you're talking about, let's say, rooms, you can talk about decor, etc. In that, you can look at the different ratings, reviews, and in this case, you kind of keep a track, and you can update this data literally on a daily basis to understand how things are changing, and again measure how do you improve the overall experience. So I was very good on time. I have more case studies, but unfortunately, we have it at the back end, but happy to share more as of interest. One of the closing thoughts before we move into question and answers is, we all, like, this question keeps coming about AI. Is it going to change people? I think one of the big closing thoughts I have, I'm a huge fan of AI, like you would have seen. I'm passionate about it. I'm challenging an entire industry of saying that how you can use AI, how it's better to do it. But let's understand that it's there to ease your life. Yeah, it's there to understand complex problems and make better decisions, but a machine doesn't decide for you. You still have to work what you've trained to do. We are still people behind this. We still need to identify the problem. We still need to understand the business challenges. We need to create a brief, understand how to use AI to get information to address that problem. So the human element still, of course, is at the core of everything, but machines are there to kind of really make things easier for you, better for you, more accurate for you, but it doesn't replace us. And that's that. Thank you very much. We've got any questions?
Thank you for that.
I'm just going to
Yes.
stop sharing.
Thank you for that vital insight, Faisal, towards the end, especially. We have a few questions from the people that had registered at the beginning. And people who are there at the session, you can always use the chat option to put your questions. Then I'll be sure to put them forward to Faisal. First questions from Rob. He asks how to overcome LLM limitations and ensure trusted output quality up to human standards. For example, not forgetting to analyze parts of data, ensure that all actual insights are actually retrieved.
Okay. I briefly touched upon the challenges, like I was talking about misinformation myself in my deck. There are challenges. Data quality but we've come a long way. Like I was talking about those models where now the accuracies of, we test those accuracies at 90%, 95%. But to keep the answer simple, that is going to keep improving. But I'll tell you that what people are doing. For example, you've got even ChatGPT or OpenAI is the company, which actually uses, so there's a human element of testing. For example, what ChatGPT does or OpenAI does, it has something called, they have a program called um, reinforcement learning human feedback, where everything goes through a testing through a human phase. So a human actually tests a lot of outputs in different scenarios to see how it's working out. And those kind of things measures are taken into place. Or we have QC controllers, right? So whenever there's a scenario, so our QC person, we have a full-time dedicated person. Wherever the data comes in place, there's a QC who goes through not all the data. It's humanly possible, but there are ways or mechanisms in which you kind of take parts of data at different intervals to see the accuracies and to see if they're making sense and right, or if it's kind of doing that. The other ways are also, there are certain ways. For example, IBM had something interesting where it takes care of the biases. So you have racial biases, you have gender biases. So they've got some tool called the, if I'm not wrong, it's called the fairness, AI fairness tool. It's an IBM tool, which kind of takes care of those biases. So there are systems in place, right from human element to technology driven, which test a lot of quality and that keeps improving. And we, like I said, we've come a long way where with LLMs, with image recognition now, where the quality is only getting better. So I think we've reached a stage where I can very confidently say that it's quality things out there, and wherever the gaps are, we keep improving and working on it.
Perfect, thank you. So the next question was from Sardar asking about enabling tools for market researchers, especially those to do with helping on things like keywords, domains, rankings for owned media, and similar on earned mediums. So basically about these tools.
Hmm. There are a lot of tools now, right? I won't. I mean, for example, what we do as an organization, Scylla, which is also a technology. It's a tool basically that is helping you access consumer data, uh, kind of get that data accessible to you on your desk at a daily basis, auto refreshed, with interpretations and analysis. So that's a technology in itself. I think you mentioned, if I'm not wrong, you mentioned generation of keywords and everything. So like I was talking about my
Correct.
GPT Assistance. GPT Assistance is a game changer. There's no doubt. The hype is real. It is worth it. If at all, we're not talking enough about it in terms of the changes it can bring in. Earlier, I would have perhaps generated 300, 600 keywords for a certain topic to capture data. Today, I can use a GPT assistant. I can go on Lara, or I can use a trained GPT system, which goes on to the system and says that I am doing a study on health. Can you create all keywords which ensure that I'm capturing every conversation around health, and give me a list of keywords. You will get a list of 300, 400 keywords. And then, of course, humanly, you can kind of quickly evaluate it and everything. But I think, so to say, there are technology platforms that enable market researchers like Scylla, but then you've got platforms like GPT Assistance that are really changing the game out there.
Perfect. We have one question that just came in from Mohsan Imran, asking about how is generative AI going to impact existing traditional research practices, especially on secondary side where access to certain insights resources is subscription based.
Okay, if good question. Uh, so secondary research is something I was doing a project for one of the leading real estate agencies here, where there's a literally a person who's sitting there and doing a lot of secondary research, in analysis and reading and analyzing data, and it's an extremely difficult and time consuming job. We've created a mechanism for them where what we do is, it's a part of a larger study, but this is a smaller component that's a part of a larger study, where what we do is we go to we have a system to capture, like I said, Google. So you're able to capture, let's say if I say trends in the real estate industry, and I get, let's say, 5 pages of results. I can take all those 5 pages of all the results and get all the articles that are around the trends of real estate and put them in, again, let's say a system like Lara. Like I showed you, I was uploading a file, and based on uploading the file, I got a result, right? Similarly, if you upload all those trends, you can literally get all the trends listed out based on that. You don't need a human intervention. You just need a system in place where it captures all the trends. So this is specifically for secondary research, true for other kind of types of research where you're using generative AI, not only for, like I said, of course, secondary research, but also aspects like questionnaire development or even interpretation of certain insights, creating hypotheses, understanding what's going on, why something is happening potentially.
Understood. So I think we have time for perhaps one more.
Yeah.
Um, Saket asked, there's an always on discussion on how AI will replace people. Your thoughts, especially in the context of market research industry.
This is a discussion that's been going on for a while now, since chat GPT and everything has come in place, like, the AI will take over the world and what will happen and stuff like that. I've got two perspectives on that. One, no, and I think that was my closing thought also, that a human being is still doing the thinking. We need to acknowledge that the machine is not making us work. We are making the machine work. We are still giving the instruction to the machine. We are still getting the responses from the machine. So it's us doing the talking to the machine. So when we're talking about a business challenge, addressing that business challenge, it's still the human element. So the first answer to that question is, will AI take over? No, it will not take over. You still need a strong human interface. But, and there's a big but out there, is that skill sets will change. So you still need people, but your skill sets will change. So for example, if a serious skill set was for me as a researcher, I have 20 years of research experience. 10 years back, one of the biggest skill sets was, how do I generate ideas from data? Now I don't need to necessarily look at that skill set, because I'm not looking at someone who can generate ideas, but someone who can use machines to generate ideas, evaluate them, and take it to the next stage. It's making my life simpler. So it's extremely important for anyone in the market research industry as of today, or any industry, to understand how to make best use of technology to make your life easier, and keep kind of upskilling yourself.
Perfect. Time for one more.
Sure.
Yeah, let's take the last one from Linnell. How do you manage misinformation or incentivized information that people put up on review or social platforms?
Misinformation is something which is going to be a challenge, continues to be a challenge. But there are ways to, when you have trended data, you can see patterns, and it's not very difficult for a system or a machine to capture aberrations. And this is very common. I like the example that she gave about reviews, because we are aware that when we do a lot of review studies, capturing reviews, ratings, and product feedback, and restaurant feedbacks, etc., right? Service banks, whatsoever, there is often a situation where you will see aberrational reviews, and the system is able to pick out that this is something that's aberrational, which is more than a threshold. And then when you kind of go into that, you can pick out that this is the same person, or this is kind of happening in a certain way. And that's essentially happening because their restaurants or hotels are incentivizing people. But again, the system kind of picks these things up.
Okay, and the last question before you leave, Ashish asks, how does a consumer insights manager decide if a study should be done using a typical quant or a qual study or an AI-driven research?
I can do an entire session on that, but to keep things simple, there are certain things where traditional research, whether it's a qual research or quant research, is extremely unavoidable. Whereas wherever there is a testing required, so you might be testing a concept, testing an idea, testing a product, testing a communication. Whenever there's a stimulus involved where you have to show, so I have to show Shubhang a product, get him to, like the hair color example I was saying, you have to give a hair color product, get them to apply it, and take feedback on day 1 and week 3, right? And there is no AI in that case. In that case, we used AI to analyze open-ended questions, but you have to have a face one-on-one interaction. For everything else, where there's exploration, where there's understanding required, and you're not testing, but you're understanding, AI is the ideal way to go.
Perfect. With that, I would like to conclude the session. First of all, I would like to thank you, Faisal, for taking us through the entire topic in a comprehensive manner. Well, as comprehensive as time would allow you to. I would really like to thank our host for joining today's session, and for all of you who listened in. Be rest assured, we will be uploading this on our social media channels, mainly on YouTube, and sharing it across, and as well as you can expect an email with the link to this session. So thank you everyone once again, and I look forward to meeting you all in the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Shubhang. Thanks everyone for joining.